September 4th, 476 AD. Ravenna, Italy. A teenage boy sits on a throne he never wanted. His name is Romulus Augustulus, Little Augustus, and today a barbarian general named Odoacer walks into the palace with an offer. Not a negotiation, an offer.
Abdicate. Go home, I'll give you a pension. You'll live.
The boy signs the document. Outside, there are no riots, no last stands, no legions marching to defend Rome, because there are no legions left. The Western Roman Empire, the most formidable military power of the ancient world, the civilization that dominated the Mediterranean for centuries, that built roads from Britain to the Euphrates and aqueducts that still carry water today, ends with a teenager's signature. No battle brought it down, no sudden invasion, no apocalypse. It just stopped. 5 centuries earlier, Rome had been a city-state fighting for survival against its neighbors. Then it became an empire that controlled 3 continents. An empire where a single citizenship connected millions of people across thousands of miles, where law, language, and infrastructure unified the known world. And for 500 years, it worked. But here's what nobody tells you. Rome didn't fall because it was conquered. It fell because the systems that made it Rome, the army, the economy, the idea of citizenship itself, slowly rotted from the inside until there was nothing left to defend. So how does a city of farmers become the greatest empire in history? And why does it collapse, not with a bang, but with a whimper? Stay with me, because this isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint for how civilizations end. If the greatest empire ever built could fall apart because it stopped maintaining what made it great, what does that say about ours? Hit subscribe, because this story took 1,000 years to play out, and we're going to watch every moment. Let's rewind. Back before the fall. Back to a city built on 7 hills, surrounded by enemies. Rome's secret wasn't genius. It was paranoia, the kind that turns farmers into soldiers and neighbors into enemies. Close your eyes and picture Rome in 509 BC. Not the marble empire you've seen in movies. The Rome that came before. A city-state on the Tiber River. Population maybe 50,000. Surrounded by more powerful neighbors. The Etruscans to the north, the Latin tribes to the south, the Samnites to the east. Rome is one city among dozens. And it's nobody special. The Romans just overthrew their king, Tarquin the Proud, a tyrant who ruled by fear. The aristocrats, the patricians, kicked him out and declared, "Never again will we bow to a king." They created the Republic. 2 consuls, elected annually, sharing power. A senate of wealthy landowners advising them, and a complex system of checks and balances designed to prevent any one man from becoming too powerful. It sounds noble. In practice, it was brutal. The patricians controlled everything. The plebeians, the common people, had almost no rights. They couldn't hold office, couldn't marry patricians, couldn't even know the laws because the laws weren't written down. When plebeians fell into debt, they became slaves to their creditors. And Rome was constantly at war. The early Roman Republic wasn't building an empire, it was surviving. Every year, new threats, the Etruscans, the Volsci, the Aequi, city-states that wanted to conquer Rome or burn it to the ground. So Rome adapted. The Romans created something no other city-state had, a citizen army. Not professional soldiers, not mercenaries, citizens. Every Roman man between 17 and 46 could be called to serve. Rich or poor, if you were a citizen, you fought. and the Romans were good at it. Not because they had better equipment, not because they were naturally superior warriors. Rome was better organized, the legion, a unit often around 4,000 to 5,000 men, divided into smaller groups called maniples, flexible, disciplined, able to adapt to terrain and enemy tactics. When the Romans lost a battle, and they lost plenty, they didn't collapse. They recalculated. Then they came back. And slowly, Rome stopped just surviving. It started winning. By 343 BC, Rome controlled central Italy. By 275 BC, all of Italy south of the Po River. But winning created a problem. What do you do with conquered people? Most empires enslaved them, taxed them into poverty, treated them as subjects. Rome did something different. They offered citizenship. Not immediately. Not to everyone. But if you fought for Rome, if you contributed to Rome, you could become Roman. This was revolutionary. Being Roman wasn't about ethnicity. It was about law, language, and loyalty. A Samnite warrior who'd fought against Rome could become a Roman citizen. His children could hold office. His grandchildren could serve in the Senate. This created something unprecedented, an empire built on inclusion, not just conquest, and it made Rome nearly unstoppable. Because conquered people didn't just submit, they joined. But inclusion has a cost. The bigger Rome got, the more Rome had to feed, and the more violence it needed to stay Rome. And then Rome made a mistake. It looked across the Mediterranean and saw Carthage, a wealthy trading empire based in North Africa, controlled Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and southern Spain, had a navy that dominated the western Mediterranean. Carthage was rich. Rome wanted what it had. In 264 BC, Rome and Carthage went to war. The First Punic War lasted 23 years. Rome had no navy at the start, so they built one, copied Carthaginian ship designs, added a boarding bridge, the Corvus, so their soldiers could turn naval battles into land battles. They lost entire fleets to storms, built new ones, lost those too, built again. By 241 BC, Rome had won. Carthage paid a massive indemnity, gave up Sicily. But Carthage wasn't finished. In 218 BC, a Carthaginian general named Hannibal did something nobody thought possible. He invaded Italy. Not by sea. Overland, through Spain, across the Alps, with an army of 50,000 men and 37 war elephants. Half his army died crossing the mountains. Most of the elephants didn't survive. But Hannibal made it, and for the next 16 years, he destroyed every Roman army sent against him. At Cannae, in 216 BC, Hannibal surrounded and annihilated a massive Roman army, tens of thousands of men. It's still studied in military academies as a masterpiece of tactics. In a single afternoon, Rome lost a generation of soldiers. Any other state would have surrendered. Rome refused. They changed strategy, avoided direct battle, burned crops Hannibal's army needed, sent armies to Spain to cut off his reinforcements, slowly strangled him. In 202 BI, a Roman general named Scipio Africanus invaded North Africa. Hannibal was recalled to defend Carthage. They met at Zama. Scipio won. Carthage surrendered, gave up its fleet, paid another massive indemnity, and Rome became the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. But Rome wasn't satisfied. In 149 BC, Rome went to war with Carthage again. Not because Carthage threatened them, because Rome wanted Carthage gone. The Third Punic War lasted 3 years. In 146 BC, Roman forces breached Carthage's walls. The city burned for 17 days. Survivors were sold into slavery. The city was razed. There's a legend that Romans salted the earth so nothing would grow there again. Probably not true, but it captures the brutality. Carthage was erased, and Rome controlled the Mediterranean. But success created a crisis. Rome's wars had made some men unimaginably wealthy. Generals returned with slaves, gold, and land. Senators grew rich from provincial taxes. Meanwhile, small farmers, the backbone of the Roman army, were being destroyed. They'd been away from their farms for years fighting Rome's wars. When they came home, their land was ruined. Patricians bought it up cheap and created massive estates. Latifundia, worked by slaves. Landless veterans flooded into Rome. Unemployed, angry, desperate. The Republic's political system couldn't handle it. In 133 BC, a tribune named Tiberius Gracchus proposed land reform. Redistribute public land to landless citizens. The Senate murdered him. His brother Gaius tried the same thing 12 years later. The Senate murdered him too. Violence became normal in Roman politics. And then came the generals. Gaius Marius reformed the Roman army in 107 BC. Before Marius, only landowners could serve. After Marius, anyone could enlist. The army became professional. Soldiers served for 16 years. They were paid, equipped by the state. And when they retired, they expected land. But here's the problem. The Senate didn't want to give them land. So soldiers started looking to their generals for rewards, not to the state, to the men who led them. Loyalty shifted, and that's when the Republic started to die. Marius clashed with another general, Sulla, over command of an eastern campaign. Sulla did something no Roman had ever done. He marched his legions on Rome itself. Civil war. Marius fled. Sulla won. Declared himself dictator, purged his enemies. Then, surprisingly, retired and restored the Republic. But the precedent was set. A general with a loyal army could take Rome, and in 60 BC, 3 men realized they didn't need to fight each other. They could share power, the first triumvirate. Pompey, the great general. Crassus, the richest man in Rome. And a rising politician named Gaius Julius Caesar. They divided the Republic between them. Caesar got Gaul, modern France. For 9 years, Caesar conquered Gaul. He fought the Helvetii, the Germanic tribes, the Belgi. He crossed the Rhine twice just to prove he could. Crossed to Britain twice. He enslaved over 1 million people. Killed another 1 million. And he made himself fabulously wealthy and politically untouchable. Meanwhile, Crassus died trying to conquer Parthia. Pompey grew jealous of Caesar's success. The Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar refused. On January 10th, 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy, with a single legion. Alea iacta est. The die is cast. It was treason. It was also the end of the Republic. Civil war. Again. Caesar's veterans destroyed Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, was murdered on arrival. Caesar arrived in Egypt, met Cleopatra, helped her secure the throne. By 45 BC, Caesar had defeated all his rivals. He was dictator of Rome. He reformed the calendar, started massive building projects, settled veterans in colonies, planned campaigns against Parthia. The Senate was terrified. They'd spent 500 years preventing any one man from holding too much power. And now Caesar was effectively king. On March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius, stabbed Caesar to death at the base of Pompey's statue. 23 stab wounds. The assassins thought they were saving the Republic. They were wrong. Caesar's assassination triggered another civil war. Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant, and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, just 19 years old, hunted down the assassins. Then they turned on each other. Antony allied with Cleopatra in Egypt. Octavian controlled Italy. They split the empire between them for a decade. In 31 BC, they finally fought at the Battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet destroyed Antony's. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Alexandria and committed suicide. Octavian was now the sole ruler of Rome. In 27 BC, he appeared before the Senate and offered to restore the Republic. The Senate, filled with his supporters, refused. They begged him to keep power. They gave him a new title, Augustus, the revered one. Octavian took it, and the Roman Republic died. The Roman Empire was born. Augustus understood something the Senate didn't. Romans hated kings, but they were exhausted by civil war. They wanted stability, order, peace. So Augustus gave them the appearance of the Republic while holding all real power. He called himself Princeps, first citizen, not emperor, not king, just the first among equals. But he controlled the army, he controlled the treasury, he appointed governors, he made the laws. The Senate still met, still debated, still voted. But everyone knew where real power lay. And it worked. Augustus ruled for 41 years, longer than any previous Roman leader. He stabilized the currency, reformed the tax system, built roads, aqueducts, temples. He created the Praetorian Guard, 9,000 elite soldiers stationed in Rome to protect the emperor. This would later prove to be a terrible idea. He expanded the empire, conquered Spain, Egypt, pushed into Germany until 3 legions were annihilated in the Teutoburg forest. After that, Augustus declared the Rhine and Danube rivers would be Rome's northern borders. When Augustus died in 14 AD, the empire was stable, prosperous, at peace. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, had begun. For the next 2 centuries, the Mediterranean world knew unprecedented stability. You could travel from Britain to Syria without crossing a hostile border. Roads connected every major city. A common currency. A common language. Latin in the west, Greek in the east. A common legal system. Trade flourished. Egyptian grain fed Rome. Spanish silver filled the treasury. Silk from China reached Roman markets via the Silk Road. Cities grew. Londinium, Lutetia, Paris, Colonia Agrippina, Cologne. These weren't just military outposts. They were centers of commerce and culture. Roman engineering transformed the landscape. Aqueducts carried water across miles of countryside into cities. The Pont du Gard in southern France still stands. 3 tiers of stone arches carrying water across a river valley. Roads connected the empire. 50,000 miles of paved roads. You can still walk on some of them today. The Colosseum, the Pantheon, Hadrian's Wall, Trajan's Column. These weren't just buildings, they were statements. Rome is eternal. But behind the marble, cracks were forming. Rome had built a machine that only worked if the man at the top was competent. And then the machine started rolling dice. The problem with emperors is succession. Augustus had carefully managed his succession. But not every emperor did. Some were competent. Trajan conquered Dacia, modern Romania, and pushed the empire to its greatest territorial extent. Marcus Aurelius defended the northern frontier while writing philosophy. Others were disasters. Caligula, who allegedly planned to name his horse a consul. Nero, who, legend says, performed while Rome burned, then blamed Christians and used them as human torches to light his gardens. Commodus, who thought he was Hercules, and fought as a gladiator in the arena while the empire collapsed around him. And the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's bodyguards, realized they had power. If they didn't like an emperor, they could just kill him and install someone new. In 69 AD, the year of the 4 emperors, Rome learned what it meant when the bodyguards start choosing the boss. 4 emperors in a single year, 3 murdered. And later, in 193 AD, the Praetorians did the unthinkable. They literally auctioned the imperial throne to the highest bidder. This was not sustainable. By the late 2nd century, the empire faced new problems. Raiding parties were crossing rivers that used to feel like walls. Germanic tribes in the north, Parthians in the east. The army was stretched thin, and maintaining legions across thousands of miles cost a fortune. Roman soldiers were paid well. They expected bonuses, retirement benefits, land. To pay for this, emperors debased the currency, added cheaper metals to silver coins. The currency lost trust. Prices exploded. By the mid-3rd century, the empire was in crisis. Between 235 and 284 AD, 50 years, Rome had at least 26 different emperors. Most died violently. Some lasted just months. Frontiers turned into doorways. Germanic tribes poured across the Rhine and Danube. The Sassanid Persian Empire conquered Roman territories in the east. At one point, the empire split into 3 pieces. Gaul and Britain formed the Gallic Empire. The eastern provinces formed the Palmyrene Empire. The center barely held. It looked like the end. And then one man pulled it back from the brink. In 284 AD, a soldier named Diocletian became emperor. He looked at the empire and realized, it's too big for one man to govern. So he split it. The Tetrarchy, rule of 4, 2 senior emperors, 2 junior emperors, 1 pair for the west, 1 for the east. When the senior emperors retired, the juniors would step up. It was supposed to solve the succession crisis. It didn't. But it bought time. Diocletian also reformed the economy, tried to clamp down on inflation with the edict on maximum prices, increased the size of the army, reorganized the provinces, and he launched the worst persecution of Christians in Roman history. Christianity had been growing for 3 centuries. By Diocletian's time, maybe 10% of the empire was Christian. They refused to worship the emperor as a god, refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods. Diocletian saw them as a threat to unity. Between 303 and 311 AD, thousands of Christians were executed, churches burned, scriptures confiscated. But persecution didn't work. There were too many Christians, and the more you killed, the more martyrs you created. Diocletian retired in 305 AD, the first emperor to voluntarily step down since Augustus. Within a year, the Tetrarchy collapsed into civil war. Constantine emerged from the chaos. In 312 AD, Constantine fought a rival emperor at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome. According to legend, he saw a vision before the battle, a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Constantine put the Christian symbol on his soldiers' shields. He won. And in 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. Religious tolerance. Christians could worship freely. By the end of his reign, Constantine had done something unthinkable. He made Christianity the favored religion of the empire. He built churches, gave bishops political power, exempted Christian clergy from taxes. In 325 AD, he convened the Council of Nicaea to settle Christian theological disputes. The emperor, once a god himself, was now defining Christian doctrine. Christianity and Rome fused, but Constantine made another decision that would shape the empire's future. In 330 AD, he moved the capital. Not Rome, a new city, Byzantium, on the Bosporus Strait between Europe and Asia. He renamed it Constantinople, New Rome. It made strategic sense. Constantinople was closer to the threatened eastern frontier, easier to defend, controlled trade routes between the Mediterranean and Black Sea. But it sent a message. Rome isn't the center anymore. The empire's gravity was shifting east. When Constantine died in 337 AD, the empire was stable again. But the problems hadn't gone away. They'd just been postponed. The state couldn't afford its own border. The frontiers were still under pressure. The economy was still fragile. And a new threat was emerging. The Huns, a nomadic people from Central Asia. The Huns moved west in the late 4th century, displacing Germanic tribes. Those tribes had nowhere to go except into Roman territory. In 376 AD, the Goths, fleeing the Huns, asked permission to settle in the empire. The Romans agreed. But then Roman officials abused them, starved them, enslaved their children. The Goths revolted. In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, a Gothic army destroyed a Roman force and killed Emperor Valens. It was the first time in centuries that a Roman emperor had died in battle against barbarians. The empire was losing control. In 395 AD, Emperor Theodosius died. He divided the empire between his two sons. Honorius got the west, Arcadius got the east. It was supposed to be temporary. An administrative convenience. It became permanent. The Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire were now separate entities. Different capitals, different armies, different priorities. The East was richer. Controlled Egypt, the breadbasket. Controlled the lucrative Eastern trade routes. Had Constantinople, fortified, prosperous, nearly impregnable. The West was poorer. The West started hiring its future replacements. Rome itself was no longer even the capital. It had moved to Ravenna, safer from invasion. And the West was bleeding. In 406 AD, the Rhine froze. Germanic tribes, Vandals, Suebi, Alans, crossed the frozen river into Gaul. The Roman army couldn't stop them. Gaul was ravaged. Spain was invaded. Britain was abandoned. By 410 AD, Rome effectively told the Britons, "Defend yourselves." 300 years of Roman rule in Britain ended with a letter. In 410 AD, a Visigothic army led by King Alaric marched on Rome. Not as invaders. Alaric had been a Roman general. His troops had fought for Rome. He just wanted land and recognition for his people. The Senate refused. Alaric besieged Rome. The Senate negotiated. Alaric withdrew. Then Rome reneged on the deal. In August 410 AD, Alaric's forces entered Rome through the Salarian Gate, opened by slaves. For 3 days, the Visigoths looted the city. Rome hadn't been sacked in 800 years. The psychological impact was enormous. St. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." But Alaric wasn't trying to destroy Rome. He took gold and supplies, then left, died a few months later. The Western Empire limped on. But the real crisis wasn't the Visigoths, it was the Huns. In 434 AD, a new Hun leader emerged. His name was Attila. Attila united the Hun tribes and built an empire from the steppes of Russia to the Rhine. He demanded tribute from Rome. When Rome refused, he invaded. In 451 AD, Attila marched into Gaul with an army so massive that Roman chroniclers described it as endless. The Romans scraped together a coalition: Roman forces, Visigothic allies, Alan cavalry. They met at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. It was one of the bloodiest battles in ancient history. Casualties may have reached 100,000. Both sides claimed victory. But Attila withdrew from Gaul. The next year he invaded Italy, sacked cities, reached the gates of Rome. Pope Leo XIII met Attila outside the city. What they discussed, nobody knows. But Attila turned around and left. In 453 AD, Attila died. His empire collapsed immediately. But the damage was done. The Western Empire was gutted. By 450 AD, the Western Roman Empire existed in name only. Emperors were puppets. Germanic generals held real power. Entire provinces had been lost. The Western army relied more and more on federate forces and Germanic commanders who felt little loyalty to Rome. Money stopped working. Barter crept back in. Trade routes were cut. Cities shrank. In Gaul, Spain, North Africa, Britain, former Roman provinces, local strongmen and Germanic kings ruled. They might pay lip service to Rome. But Rome couldn't enforce anything. The empire wasn't conquered. It was hollowed out. In 455 AD, the Vandals, who'd conquered North Africa, sailed from Carthage and sacked Rome. For 2 weeks they systematically looted the city, stripped gold from buildings, took treasures, art, even roof tiles. When they left, Rome was a shell. Centuries later, their name would become shorthand for destruction, vandalism. For the next 20 years, emperors came and went. Generals made and unmade them. Nobody cared. Germanic generals didn't even pretend to respect the emperors anymore. In 472 AD, a general named Ricimer became effectively the ruler of the West. He installed and deposed emperors at will. When Ricimer died, another general, Orestes, took power. He made his teenage son emperor. That boy was Romulus Augustulus. Romulus Augustulus, little Augustus. The name was almost mocking. He was 14. Maybe 16. Sources aren't clear. He didn't choose to be emperor. His father made him emperor. He was a figurehead. In 476 AD, Germanic mercenaries in Italy demanded land. Orestes refused. The mercenaries mutinied. Their leader, Odoacer, killed Orestes and marched on Ravenna. Odoacer didn't want to be emperor. He just wanted the charade to end. On September 4th, 476 AD, Odoacer entered Ravenna and told Romulus Augustulus, "Abdicate. Go home. I'll give you a pension." Romulus Augustulus signed the abdication. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia, the crown, the purple robes, the scepter, to Constantinople. He told the Eastern Emperor, "There's no need for an emperor in the West anymore. You're the emperor of the whole empire now." The Eastern Roman Empire continued for another 1,000 years. The Western Roman Empire ended with a pen stroke and a pension. So what killed Rome? Historians have debated this for 1,500 years, and there's no single answer. But here's what we know. The economy collapsed. Rome's economy depended on conquest. New territories meant new slaves, new land, new tribute. When Rome stopped expanding, the money stopped flowing. Debasing the currency caused chronic inflation. People stopped believing in the silver. Trade routes were cut by Germanic tribes and Persian wars. Cities that depended on imported grain starved. Wealthy Romans hoarded gold and moved to fortified country estates. The tax base collapsed. The empire couldn't pay for its own survival. The army changed. By the 4th century, huge portions of the Western army were recruited from beyond old Roman Italy. Germanic federates, mercenaries loyal to their commanders, not the empire. When the money ran out, they stopped fighting for Rome. Or worse, they fought against Rome. The army that conquered the Mediterranean wasn't built for this new kind of war. Fast-moving cavalry, guerrilla warfare, enemies who dissolved into forests and reappeared behind your lines. And when the army couldn't defend what was left, the frontiers dissolved. Political instability destroyed continuity. Between 235 and 476 AD, 241 years, the Western Roman Empire had dozens of emperors. Most lasted less than a year. Many were murdered. There was no consistent policy, no long-term planning, just survival. Emperors spent more time fighting rivals than defending the empire. The Senate became powerless. Provincial governors ruled like independent kings. The idea of Rome, the republic, the law, the civic virtue, died long before the empire did. But the real answer is simpler and more tragic. Rome stopped being Roman. The empire that had turned Gauls, Iberians, and Africans into Romans couldn't do it anymore. Citizenship became universal in 212 AD, partly integration, partly revenue. But when everyone became Roman on paper, being Roman stopped feeling special in practice. The army was filled with men who'd never seen Rome. The bureaucracy was corrupt and incompetent. The rich cared only about their estates. The poor had nothing. Nobody believed in Rome anymore. And when Germanic generals like Odoacer finally took over, they didn't destroy Rome. They just acknowledged what everyone already knew. There's nothing left to defend. But empires don't disappear cleanly. When the Western Roman Empire fell, it left behind fragments. Germanic kingdoms carved up the former provinces, the Visigoths in Spain, the Vandals in North Africa, the Franks in Gaul, the Ostrogoths in Italy. They called themselves kings, but they imitated Rome. They used Roman titles, minted Roman-style coins, kept Roman law where it suited them, because Rome's infrastructure was too valuable to abandon. Aqueducts still carried water, roads still connected cities, Latin still bound elites together, and in the East, the Roman Empire survived, the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople as its capital, Greek as its language, Christianity as its religion. They called themselves Romans. Basileus ton Romaion, Emperor of the Romans. And they lasted another 1,000 years, until 1453 AD, when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. But Rome's ghost lingered longer than its corpse. The Catholic Church, headquartered in Rome, became the inheritor of Roman authority in the West. Latin remained the language of scholarship, law, and religion for 1,000 years. The Pope crowned Charlemagne, Emperor of the Romans, in 800 AD, creating the Holy Roman Empire. European kings for the next 1,500 years claimed to be Rome's successor. Kaiser, Tsar. Both words derived from Caesar. Even Napoleon declared himself emperor and crowned himself with laurels like a Roman. Rome's legal system became the foundation of law across Europe and beyond. Roman roads shaped medieval trade routes. Roman cities became the centers of kingdoms. The idea of Rome, that civilization could unify diverse peoples under one law, one language, one identity, never died. It just changed form. So what does it all mean? Rome built the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. For 500 years, it brought unprecedented peace, prosperity, and stability to the Mediterranean. But empires aren't built to last. They're built to expand. And when Rome stopped expanding, the systems that made it strong became liabilities. Rome didn't fall because barbarians were strong. It fell because Rome was no longer Rome. The economy that depended on conquest collapsed when there was nothing left to conquer. The army that defended the empire became filled with men who didn't feel Roman. The citizenship that unified millions of people became meaningless when everyone was a citizen, but nobody believed in being Roman. The frontiers that protected civilization dissolved when there was nobody willing to defend them. And the emperors who were supposed to lead became figureheads in the hands of generals and bureaucrats. Rome didn't collapse in a single moment. It rotted, slowly, over centuries. By the time Romulus Augustulus signed his abdication, there was nothing left to abdicate. The marble buildings still stood. The aqueducts still carried water. The roads still connected cities. But the idea of Rome, the Republic, the law, the vision of a unified world, was already dead. Empires don't fall when they're defeated. They fall when people stop believing in them. And on September 4th, 476 AD, nobody believed anymore. The empire that ruled the world for centuries ended not with fire and blood, but with a signature and a pension. The Colosseum still stands. The Pantheon still inspires. Hadrian's Wall still marks the border of what Rome once was. But the empire, that died the moment people stopped thinking of themselves as Roman, and history buried it, like emperors turning to dust.